The wind bit at his face as David trudged through the icy streets of the city. He pulled his worn jacket tighter, the fabric so thin it did little to keep out the cold. His breath came out in short white clouds, disappearing almost as quickly as they formed. Around him, life moved on as if he didn't exist. People hurried past, heads down, eyes fixed on their phones, boots clicking on the wet pavement. The smell of roasted chestnuts drifted from a nearby vendor's stall, mingling with the metallic scent of winter rain. David had once walked these streets differently. A few years ago, he had worn crisp shirts and carried a briefcase, his days filled with meetings and deadlines. Back then, the city had felt like it was his. But life, he'd learned, had a cruel way of reminding you how fragile everything really was. The layoff had been sudden. The company downsized, and his position was cut. The savings he'd built disappeared faster than he'd ever imagined. Rent piled up, then medical bills after his mother's illness. By the time she passed away, he was already months behind on payments. Soon, his apartment was gone, and the few possessions he'd managed to keep fit into a single backpack. Now, the streets were home. He found a quiet alley near a bakery that tossed out unsold bread at the end of the day. The owner knew him but never said anything, just left the bag outside the back door each night. It was her silent kindness, and David was grateful for it. Still, as winter deepened, the nights grew harder to bear. The shelters were always full, and the cold seeped through every layer he owned. One evening, as the first flakes of snow began to fall, David noticed an old man sitting against the brick wall of an abandoned shop. He was wrapped in a thin blanket, shivering. His hands trembled as he tried to light a small candle, the flame flickering weakly before dying. David hesitated. He didn't have much, but he still had a small piece of bread left in his pocket from earlier. He walked over, crouched down, and offered it. The old man looked up, his eyes dull with exhaustion but soft with gratitude. "You keep it," he rasped. "You need it more." David smiled faintly. "We both need it. Let's share." They broke the bread in half, eating in silence. Snow gathered on their shoulders, melting slowly into their clothes. For a few moments, David forgot his own hunger. The old man reminded him of his father, the same frail hands, the same quiet dignity. When David stood to leave, the man caught his wrist. "You have a kind soul," he murmured. "Not many do when the world turns its back." David nodded and walked on, his heart unexpectedly heavy. The next morning, he found the spot empty. The man was gone, leaving only the melted stub of a candle. He didn't know why it hurt so much, but it did. A few days later, David wandered into a community center to warm up. The place was bustling with volunteers handing out meals and blankets. A young woman in a green sweater noticed him lingering near the door. "Hey there," she said with a friendly smile. "Come in. You're welcome to grab a meal." He hesitated, unused to kindness that wasn't followed by suspicion. "I don't want to take food from someone who needs it more." She shook her head. "There's enough for everyone. I promise." David finally sat down, a bowl of hot soup placed before him. The warmth seeped into his hands, and he felt something stir inside, something he hadn't felt in a long time. The woman introduced herself as Emma. She moved through the room with an ease that seemed to draw light wherever she went. After the meal, she handed him a pair of gloves. "We've got extras," she said. David accepted them quietly. The fabric was soft, new. His fingers tingled from the sudden warmth. That night, as he walked through the dimly lit streets, he thought about Emma and the people at the center. They didn't ask for anything in return. They didn't look at him like he was invisible. Maybe, he thought, that was the beginning of change, not grand gestures, just small hands choosing to help. The next week, David returned to the center, at first only for a meal, but soon, to help. It started small, stacking chairs, sweeping floors, carrying boxes. The volunteers were surprised but welcomed his help. Emma smiled at him every time, her eyes lighting up as if she'd expected him to come back all along. "You don't have to do this, you know," she said one day as they packed care bags for the shelter. "I know," David replied, sealing a box with tape. "But I want to." It felt good to be useful again, to have a purpose, even if it was just folding blankets or sorting donations. His body was tired, but it was a good kind of tired, the kind that came from doing something that mattered. Over the following weeks, he learned the names of others who came through the doors, men and women with stories not so different from his own. A single mother trying to find work. A teenager who'd aged out of foster care. A veteran who still woke up shaking from dreams he couldn't talk about. David listened, shared his bread when he had it, and offered quiet comfort. Slowly, his presence became a steady one among the faces of the center. One morning, as he swept the hallway, a man in a suit walked in, his breath clouding in the cold. He looked lost, out of place. "Hi," David said, setting the broom aside. "Can I help you?" The man nodded. I was told this is where they collect winter supplies." "Yeah," David replied, leading him toward the donation area. "We're accepting coats, gloves, blankets, anything warm, really." The man handed over a few large bags. "My company's been clearing out storage. Figured these could do some good." David smiled. "They will. Thank you." As they unloaded the bags, the man glanced at him curiously. "Do you work here?" "Not officially," David said. "Just helping out." The man hesitated, then asked quietly, weren't you with Greystone Financial a few years back?" "David Turner?" David froze. It had been years since anyone had spoken his name like that. "Yeah," he admitted slowly. "I was. I thought so." The man smiled faintly. "I'm Mark Ellison. I was in accounting. You probably don't remember me." David did remember, vaguely, a friendly colleague he'd seen in the break room a few times. Mark's expression softened. "I heard what happened. I'm sorry things went the way they did." David shrugged. "Life happens." Mark looked around at the busy volunteers. "You're helping a lot of people here." "Trying to," David said simply. There was a pause. Then Mark asked, "Have you thought about getting back into work? My firm's been looking for someone with your skills. If you're interested." David blinked, unsure if he'd heard correctly. "You're serious?" Mark nodded. "Absolutely. You've got experience, and, well, anyone who spends their time doing this deserves a chance." For a moment, David couldn't speak. All the months of struggle, the endless nights of cold, the quiet prayers whispered into the dark, they suddenly felt seen. "Thank you," he finally said, his voice barely steady. A week later, after a round of paperwork and a brief interview, David found himself sitting behind a desk again. It was a modest position, but it was honest work. The first time he received a paycheck, he went straight to the community center. Emma looked up from the reception desk and grinned. "Back already?" "I promised I'd keep helping," he said. "I can do more now." He handed her an envelope. Inside was a donation, small but meaningful. Emma's eyes softened. "You don't have to." "I want to," he interrupted gently. "Because someone's hands chose to help me. Now it's my turn." Over the months that followed, David's life slowly rebuilt itself. He found a small apartment, began volunteering regularly, and even started organizing job workshops at the center. He realized that the greatest change wasn't in his circumstances, it was in how he saw the world. Kindness wasn't a transaction. It was a choice. A quiet, deliberate act that could ripple outward farther than anyone could imagine. One evening, as he locked up the center after closing, David noticed a young boy standing by the door. He couldn't have been more than 12, his jacket torn, shoes caked with mud. "You okay, kid?" David asked. The boy hesitated. "I heard you give food here." David nodded. "We do. Come on in." He led the boy inside, gave him a sandwich and a cup of hot chocolate. As the boy ate, David noticed the way his hands shook, the same way his had once done. "Got somewhere to stay tonight?" he asked softly. The boy shook his head. David thought of the cold streets, the nights spent under flickering streetlights, the faces that had once passed him by. Then he thought of Emma, of Mark, of the old man who'd shared half a piece of bread. "Don't worry," he said. "We'll figure something out." He called a shelter he knew, made sure they had space, and even walked the boy there himself. As they approached the building, the boy looked up at him and asked, "Why are you helping me?" David smiled. "Because someone helped me once when I needed it." The boy stared for a moment, then nodded slowly, as if committing those words to memory. That night, David stood outside the shelter for a while, watching the snow fall. The city glowed softly in the distance, lights reflecting off the icy streets. For the first time in a long time, he felt a peace that went beyond warmth or comfort. It was the quiet knowing that he had become part of something larger than himself. He wasn't the same man who had once wandered these streets, invisible and lost. He had found his purpose again, not through success or wealth, but through compassion. Because when the world had looked away, there were still hands that chose to help. And now, those same hands, his hands, were ready to do the same for others. And that, he thought, was the truest form of healing. The kind that spreads from one act of kindness to another, binding people together in a chain that no amount of cold could ever break. The snow continued to fall, soft and steady, covering the city in a quiet, gentle white, like a promise that kindness, once chosen, never truly fades.